going into Deadpool and Wolverine, really what I expected was a Deadpool film with Wolverine starring Hugh Jackman in it, and Hugh Jackman giving the best performance. And what I got out of the film upon watching it is exactly that. Now, that's a good thing, great thing, honestly, as well as a bad thing. And I'll get into that. So, Deadpool and Wolverine is kind of a pseudo-sequel, pseudo-spin-off, pseudo-love letter to just everything superhero related. Not just Marvel, honestly. I'm gonna try and not go into spoilers because this, I'm going to say, is probably the #1 most hyped up film for this year. So I'd hate to be the one to spoil the film for everybody in the world. But the #1 thing I loved about Deadpool and Wolverine was one thing I did actually expect from it, and that was Hugh Jackman's performance as Wolverine in it. I think Hugh Jackman performed flawlessly in this film. Now, we touched on his emotional performing art in Logan, which Logan on its own is a phenomenal film, albeit I rewatched it the other day, and I do believe that the corporate villains are a bit stereotyped, cliche, but Logan overall is still a masterpiece. Deadpool and Wolverine basically ripped out Hugh Jackman's performance in that film and injected it into a Deadpool film, and that's exactly a great synopsis to explain Deadpool and Wolverine. Now, I also stated that I expected this to be a Deadpool film with Wolverine in it, and that's where one of the bad parts about this film come into play. Deadpool and Wolverine relies solely on it being a Deadpool film. Now, the humor is still top tier and there. It's all consistently funny, don't get me wrong. But, it's the third film for Deadpool, and it just starts to feel like a bit of a retread, especially with the individual jokes. Now, upon watching this film throughout, I kept thinking to myself, just based off of the kind of jokes that they were making in Deadpool and Wolverine, this film kind of reminded me of a film version of Eminem's The Death of Slim Shady album, where there were a lot of jokes about the new age gens and the wokeism and how everybody's sensitive. And honestly, Deadpool and Wolverine touches base on a lot of that shit just as much as Eminem's new album, which I laughed about all of that because honestly, it's true. Most young people are weak as fuck nowadays. But that's the thing about the writing and the humor in this film. While it's all consistently funny, it's also been there, done that in a little better ways. Now, as a preface or an interlude in this review, I love both the first two Deadpool films, but I prefer Deadpool 2. I just thought it had a stronger story, although the first Deadpool, I thought had greater storytelling craftsmanship within that story. Although, by the end of the first Deadpool, we got a cliche corporate villain, and it ended up just being a cliche love story. Whereas Deadpool 2, it was more of a maturity for Wade Wilson and being Deadpool and having to care for other people. And Deadpool and Wolverine is actually a continuation of that as well, where he needs to start saving the world, saving his world, and to do that, he has to go and find Wolverine, and that's basically another joke within itself. Now, Deadpool and Wolverine, I would probably say the worst part about this film is the VFX, the visuals. It's not that they're terrible. Most of the film is phenomenal looking, but there are a couple spots throughout the film, Deadpool and Wolverine, where it does look very fake. The first example was the first close-up shot of Ryan Reynolds' face as Wade Wilson. Now, I understand VFX can be used to make that face, but the problem is you could clearly tell I would say, especially in the first Deadpool, that they really used a lot more practical effects on his face in the first two Deadpools compared to Deadpool and Wolverine. And honestly, it's jarring just because it feels and looks lazy at this point. But at the same time, I won't even say that's the biggest gripe I have about this film. The biggest gripe, I would say, is the director, Sean Levy, which, don't get me wrong, he directed Ryan Reynolds in the film Free Guy, and I think that's a phenomenal film. I don't have a problem with Sean Levy as a director. I believe he directed the Night at the Museum films as well. But much like Steven Spielberg, nothing ever really popped out for his direction style for me. That's just my personal opinion. Now, in Deadpool and Wolverine, the gripe I have with Sean Levy's direction in this film is that, especially in the intro and throughout the film, but it does gradually minimize throughout the film, but especially the intro, there are a lot of scenes where they're just so prolonged. Like, they'll make a joke, and then I guess the joke is supposed to be the prolonging of the joke, and it feels so unnatural and abnormal for a Deadpool film, because Deadpool films are notoriously known for just being quippy one-liners and then boom, 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 keep going. Sean Levy directed this film to make it, there are a lot of quippy one-liner segments in this film, but there are also an awful lot of lingering moments. And that's one thing I really honestly hated about this film. That's probably the only thing I hate about this film. Another gripe I have with this film is that throughout Deadpool and Wolverine, the action sequences are actually beautifully shot. They're action poetry at its finest until midway to the third act, where there's a big battle, and then randomly we get non-stop shaky camera. I mean, the kind of shaky cam that you've never seen. This is like absurd, over the top, more so J.J. Abrams shaky cam style. Like, I'm saying this is worse than J.J. Abrams shaky cam. This is Sean Levy showing you an action sequence you can't even fucking follow even a toe, even a fist in it. And it's one of the biggest battles in this film that's pivotal to the story, and that's a shame, because before this battle, all of the other action sequences, the camera actually flowed well with the actors maneuvering within each other. So I don't understand why they felt the need to put in this one action sequence for shaky cam. It made no sense. Honestly, I thought it was dumb. I didn't mind the action sequence itself. I mean, compared to the other sequences in this film, I'd say that was the most cliched superhero fight in this film. But it just was an awful, terrible sequence because you couldn't see shit. You couldn't see shit all what was going on at all. Now, like I said, the rest of the film's action sequences are beautifully shot. Even in the times that there's not an action sequence, this film's writing holds up to snuff. This is a very strong, well-executed Deadpool film. And I don't hate this film at all. Honestly, I think this is a great film, and I do believe everybody should go and watch this film. This is honestly more of a mature, adult-only film, much like the first Deadpool, whereas the second Deadpool, it was kind of like a friendly welcome in your kids, because it's a family story. And they literally explicitly said that in Deadpool 2, and Deadpool 2 is still rated R. Don't get me wrong, that's still a very violent, over-the-top, absurdly mature adult film, but Deadpool 2 had family-oriented aspects compared to Deadpool 1. Deadpool and Wolverine just says fuck all to all of that, and they just throw everything in inappropriate, adult-friendly only shit right at you throughout the entirety of the film. I mean, I can't tell you how many fucking times I saw not just one, not just two, probably every character in this film get stabbed in their genital area with some kind of not even just weapon, but object. Throughout this film, there's a lot of attention on genitals being attacked. Now, it's not explicit, it's not graphic. Really, the only graphic nature of those sequences are the blood and the gory shots. But I don't want to make it out to what it's not. It is not a nude fest of a film. Really, it's not at all. There are a couple shirtless scenes, but they're made for comedy, and I think they're made very well because they don't really overly linger on them. They just kind of do a shirtless scene, make a joke, look at it, and then that's the end of it. And then they proceed. But Deadpool and Wolverine, for me, is an extreme mixed bag compared to the first two Deadpools, because really the only outstanding thing I can say about Deadpool and Wolverine is Hugh Jackman's performance. I would love to say that the action sequences are beautiful and one of the strongest aspects of this film, but because of that jarringly inappropriate shaky cam action sequence, I can't. I loved every action sequence around that. And then another thing as well I didn't like, we got a touch of some of the main villains' backstories and origins and character development, but we didn't really focus on anybody in this film as much as we did Hugh Jackman and Wolverine. Now, we got a tad more development from Deadpool because this is a continuation of Deadpool being more selfless than he used to be way back at the beginning of the first Deadpool, where he wasn't selfless against other people. He was selfless in the sense of he'd help other people, but at the end of the day, it was always just a whatever to him. Whereas, come all the way to Deadpool and Wolverine, he actually cares about a lot of shit. And that's where the main story stems from. He actually cares about losing things. And he had that aspect in Deadpool 2, so this is just a continuation into that. Now, the love letter part of my statement at the beginning of this review, the cameos. There are a fuck ton of cameos and a fuck ton of fan service throughout, not even sprinkled. I mean, this film is just made with cameos and fan service, which normally I hate that, especially Marvel. Marvel strongly overdoes cameos. Strongly in every single fucking thing, especially post-credit scenes. They always have to ham-fist other characters in it. Mostly it's like Hulk and whatnot. But in Deadpool and Wolverine, it worked and it fit well because all of the cameos, all of the meshing, all of the blending with Marvel and everything, it made sense for the humor and the writing. They didn't use it as important, pivotal parts of the main story. Now, there are some sequences where cameos are used in the main story, but at the end of the day, they ultimately end up still just being their own quippy one-liners for the sake of the film being funny. And I can wholeheartedly say that those cameos are goddamn hilarious. I will not take that away from this film. We get a lot of cameos, we get a lot of faces we haven't seen for a couple years in the Marvel Universe, and it was refreshing because we got their faces, but then they one-upped it and they completely used other shit that you won't expect them to use, and they used them, and it was refreshing. I loved it so much. And it also worked because transitioning and not using cameos for their initial fan service worked because it actually spread out the love for all of superhero films, not just Marvel. I'm gonna spoil a tiny thing for this review, for this film. Something I absolutely fucking loved about this film, Ryan Reynolds and other co-writers, you can clearly tell they completely acknowledge everything that Henry Cavill has been put through in the last year or two, to the point where they used him as a cameo, and it's fucking hilarious. But I respected it also as one of the most respectable cameo comedic scenes because Henry Cavill has been just shit on by Warner Bros., James Gunn, and Netflix at this point in the last year or two. So it's a breath of fresh fucking air for somebody to actually acknowledge that Henry Cavill was like used and abused until they didn't need him anymore. So I really loved that. Overall for me, Deadpool and Wolverine is not a terrible film, but I also wouldn't say I love it. I can wholeheartedly say that I love Deadpool 1 and 2, and each of them are at least 9 out of 10s. Deadpool and Wolverine, while I don't love it, it's not a terrible film by any means. I would probably sit this at a strong 8 out of 10 because I would gladly say this is the weakest Deadpool film. You take out Hugh Jackman, this hands down would be the weakest Deadpool film throughout. But because Hugh Jackman's in it, it's the weakest Deadpool film, but it's still a great film. Without Hugh Jackman in this might have been like a 6 out of 10 because the humor is relied so much on this film. And while I don't have a problem with it, I don't have a problem with them making jokes at Marvel and 20th Century's expenses and everybody's expense. It gets to be so overbearingly much. Like, this is literally a full 2-hour film, and 2 hours of the 2-hour film is used for non-stop jokes and references of everything that you can think of for superheroes. I did also really love and cherish that they implemented the multiverse into the storyline for Deadpool and Wolverine, and they didn't fuck it up. I thought it was very well done, very well written. But overall for me, Deadpool and Wolverine is a strong 8 out of 10. I still strongly recommend everybody to go see this film. Okay, this isn't a film I would tell you to steer clear from. Go see this film, but there are a lot of flaws to this film that you didn't see in the other 2 Deadpools. But I can honestly say Hugh Jackman and his part in this whole film is probably the strongest thing in all of Deadpool. Set aside Deadpool and his quippy one-liner jokes. But again, this being the 3rd Deadpool film, that shit's starting to kind of feel stale. It works throughout, but it's so overbearingly excessive. So, 8 out of 10, Deadpool and Wolverine. And also, the post-credit scene. The credit sequence, I absolutely loved. That alone is a 10 out of 10. That's another fan service nod and homage to everything superhero filmmaking. And then the post-credit sequence, it's really unnecessary. You do not need to see it. But if you do see it, it's really funny. But it's not necessary. But it is super funny. So yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine, 8 out of 10. Thank you.